The forgotten African fronts of World War II. Picture this. It's 1940, and while the world watches Hitler's armies sweep across Europe, another war is erupting across the scorching deserts and dense jungles of Africa. But here's what they don't tell you in the history books. This wasn't just a sideshow. The battles fought on African soil would determine whether the Allies could even survive to fight another day. And yet most people today couldn't name a single battle that happened there. I'm about to change that, because what happened in Africa during World War II is one of the most incredible, brutal, and strategically crucial stories you've never heard. Let me take you back to June 1940. France has just fallen to Nazi Germany in a matter of weeks, and Britain stands alone against the Axis powers. But Britain isn't just an island, it's an empire, and that empire stretches across Africa like a massive geographic lifeline. Egypt, Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, these aren't just colonies. They're the source of crucial resources, strategic positions, and potentially millions of soldiers. Lose Africa, and Britain loses access to the Suez Canal, the gateway to India and the oil of the Middle East. Lose Africa, and the war is essentially over before America even enters it. Now, Benito Mussolini, Italy's fascist dictator, sees an opportunity. He's got hundreds of thousands of troops stationed in Libya and Italian East Africa, which includes modern-day Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. He looks at the map and thinks this is his moment to carve out a new Roman Empire. On September 13, 1940, Italian forces under Marshal Rodolfo Graziani march from Libya into Egypt. They advance about 60 miles and then they stop. Just stop. They set up defensive camps and wait, seemingly unsure of what to do next. This hesitation would prove to be one of history's most costly mistakes. Meanwhile, down in East Africa, the Italians control a massive territory with about 250,000 troops. They're facing maybe 30,000 British, Commonwealth, and African forces. The math looks good for Italy, right? Wrong. Because what's about to happen defies all conventional military wisdom. The British commander in the region, General Archibald Wavell, is a strategic genius working with virtually nothing. He's got limited supplies, limited men, and enemies on multiple fronts. But he's got something the Italians don't: highly motivated African troops, brilliant tactical thinking, and the element of surprise. In December 1940, while everyone expects the British to stay on the defensive, Wavell launches Operation Compass. It's supposed to be a 5-day raid. Instead, it becomes a 2-month catastrophe for the Italians. British and Commonwealth forces, including troops from India, Australia, and various African nations, smash through Italian positions in Egypt. They push west into Libya, capturing Fort Capuzzo, Bardia, and Tobruk. The Italians are retreating so fast they can barely organize a defense. In 2 months, Allied forces advance 500 miles, destroy 10 Italian divisions, and capture 130,000 prisoners. They lose fewer than 2,000 men. It's one of the most lopsided victories in military history, and most people today have never even heard of it. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Just when it looks like the Allies might knock Italy completely out of Africa, Hitler makes a decision. He can't let his ally collapse, so he sends one of his most talented and aggressive commanders to Africa, Erwin Rommel, soon to be known as the Desert Fox. Rommel arrives in Tripoli in February 1941 with the Afrika Korps, a mechanized force of German troops, tanks, and artillery. His orders are to hold the line and prevent further Italian collapse. Rommel, being Rommel, decides that defense is boring. Within weeks, he's on the offensive. What happens next is a masterclass in mobile warfare. Rommel doesn't fight like a traditional general. He leads from the front, often in the first tank, navigating by compass across the featureless desert. He strikes fast, retreats faster, and constantly keeps the British guessing about where he'll attack next. By April 1941, he's pushed the Allies all the way back to the Egyptian border, reversing almost all their gains. The only place that holds out is Tobruk, where Australian, British, and Indian troops endure a siege that will last 241 days. The defenders of Tobruk become legends, supplied only by dangerous naval runs across the Mediterranean, fighting off constant attacks and temperatures that reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, while this desert war is capturing what little attention Africa gets in the history books, something equally dramatic is happening 2,000 miles to the south in East Africa. Remember those 250,000 Italian troops I mentioned? They're cut off from Italy, surrounded by British territories, and running low on supplies. The Duke of Aosta, the Italian commander, knows he's in an impossible situation, but he's determined to tie down as many Allied troops as possible to help the Axis cause in North Africa. What unfolds is an extraordinary campaign through some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. British, South African, Indian, and East African forces launch invasions from Kenya, Sudan, and Aden. They're fighting in deserts, mountains, jungles, and highlands. The distances are enormous. Imagine coordinating military operations across an area the size of Western Europe, but with almost no infrastructure, extreme heat, tropical diseases, and enemy forces dug into mountainous terrain. One of the heroes of this campaign is a man most people have never heard of, Lieutenant General Alan Cunningham. Leading forces from Kenya, he orchestrates one of the longest and fastest advances in military history. His troops march and fight their way through Italian Somaliland, covering over 1,700 miles in 53 days. They're dealing with supply lines that stretch for hundreds of miles, Italian resistance, hostile terrain, and the constant threat of disease. But they keep moving, keep fighting, and by April 1941, they've reached the Ethiopian highlands. At the same time, forces are converging from multiple directions. Emperor Haile Selassie, who was exiled when Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935, returns with British support and local Ethiopian resistance fighters. These patriots have been waging guerrilla warfare against Italian occupation for years, and now they sense their moment. The Ethiopian campaign becomes a powerful symbol, an African nation reclaiming its independence, fighting alongside Allied forces against fascist occupation. The Battle of Keren in Eritrea, fought from February to March 1941, becomes one of the most brutal engagements of the entire East African campaign. Italian forces, including many well-trained colonial troops, are positioned in mountain passes that seem almost impossible to assault. British, Indian, and Free French forces attack repeatedly, taking horrific casualties. The fighting is hand-to-hand in some places, with soldiers battling over rocky crags in scorching heat. When Keren finally falls after weeks of fighting, it breaks the back of Italian resistance in the region. By May 1941, the Duke of Aosta surrenders with the last major Italian force at Amba Alagi. Isolated garrisons hold out until November, but Italian East Africa is finished as a fighting force. Here's something that should blow your mind. Britain and its allies just conquered an area of about 1.6 million square kilometers, defeated 250,000 enemy troops, and knocked an entire theater of war out of the equation, all while simultaneously fighting Rommel in North Africa. And they did it with forces that were largely composed of African soldiers, Indian troops, and Commonwealth forces that rarely get mentioned in mainstream World War II narratives. The East African campaign is a decisive Allied victory that ensures the security of British supply routes around the Cape of Good Hope and through the Red Sea. Without this victory, the entire war in North Africa might have been unsustainable. But let's get back to that desert, because things are about to get even more intense. Through 1941 and into 1942, North Africa becomes a brutal back-and-forth struggle. Rommel attacks, the British counterattack, Rommel retreats, then attacks again. It's a war of supply lines more than anything else. Both sides are fighting at the end of enormously long logistics chains. For the British, supplies come around the Cape of Good Hope or through the dangerous Mediterranean. For Rommel, everything has to cross the Mediterranean from Italy, and the British are doing everything they can to sink those supply ships. The soldiers fighting this war deal with conditions that are almost unimaginable. Desert temperatures swing from freezing at night to 130 degrees during the day. Sandstorms can last for days, getting into equipment, food, and lungs. Water is more valuable than ammunition sometimes. Both sides develop a grudging respect for each other. This is one of the few theaters of World War II where there's something approaching chivalry. Prisoners are generally treated well, wounded enemies are often helped, and there's a shared understanding that they're all fighting in hell together. But make no mistake, this is still brutal, modern warfare. Tank battles rage across the desert, with armor facing off in what tankers call the blue, the empty desert where there's no cover and nowhere to hide. Artillery pounds positions for hours. Air raids strike constantly. Men die from wounds that would be survivable in Europe because medical facilities are so far away. Disease kills as many as enemy action in some units, and yet they keep fighting because everyone understands what's at stake. By mid-1942, Rommel is at the peak of his power. He's just captured Tobruk in June, taking 35,000 prisoners and massive stores of supplies. He's been promoted to field marshal, and he's convinced he can reach Cairo and the Suez Canal. He pushes into Egypt, and by July, he's at a small railway stop called El Alamein, just 60 miles from Alexandria. This is as far as the Axis advance will ever get in Africa, but nobody knows that yet. In Cairo, British officials are burning documents, preparing for evacuation. It looks like Egypt might fall. But Rommel has a problem. His supply lines are stretched beyond breaking. He's got fuel for maybe 3 days of operations. His tanks are worn out. His men are exhausted. Meanwhile, the British are being reinforced constantly. New tanks, including American Shermans and Grants, are arriving. A new commander takes over the British Eighth Army, Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery, a meticulous, egotistical, brilliant general who will become Rommel's greatest adversary. Montgomery does something different. Instead of rushing into attack, he builds up his forces, and builds, and builds. He trains his troops relentlessly. He stockpiles supplies. He studies Rommel's tactics. And then, on October 23, 1942, he launches the Second Battle of El Alamein with a massive artillery barrage involving over 1,000 guns. For 12 days, the battle rages across the desert. Montgomery has numerical superiority in everything: men, tanks, aircraft, supplies. But the fighting is still desperate. Rommel, who's actually in Germany on sick leave when the battle starts, rushes back and fights brilliantly with what little he has. But it's not enough. By November 4th, the Afrika Korps is in full retreat. Montgomery has won the first clear British land victory against the Germans in the entire war. Churchill later says, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." That's an exaggeration, but it captures the psychological importance of this moment. More importantly, 3 days before El Alamein begins, something else happens that will doom the Axis in Africa. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa. On November 8, 1942, American and British forces land at multiple points across Morocco and Algeria. It's the first major American ground operation in the war against Germany, involving 65,000 troops in the initial landings. The target is Vichy French territory, France's colonies that remained loyal to the collaborationist government after France's defeat. Nobody is quite sure if the French will fight or join the Allies. The answer is complicated. They fight, but not for long. After 3 days of confused combat, French forces in North Africa switch sides and join the Allies. Now Rommel is caught in a vice. Montgomery is pushing from the east. American and British forces are pushing from the west, and his supply situation is catastrophic. The Mediterranean has become a shooting gallery for Allied aircraft and ships, and the Italian supply convoys are being decimated. Hitler, in one of his increasingly irrational decisions, orders massive reinforcements sent to Tunisia. It's throwing good money after bad, pouring troops and equipment into a theater that's already lost. But it means that the final battle for North Africa will be bigger and bloodier than anyone expected. The campaign in Tunisia from November 1942 to May 1943 becomes a grinding, muddy, mountainous nightmare. This isn't the sweeping desert tank warfare of earlier years. This is infantry slogging through mountain passes in the winter rain, fighting for every hill and valley. American forces get their first real taste of combat against the Wehrmacht, and it's a harsh education. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943, German forces under Rommel smashed through inexperienced American units, causing over 6,000 casualties and sending U.S. forces reeling backward. It's a humiliating defeat, but it teaches American commanders crucial lessons about combined arms warfare, communications, and leadership. Rommel, exhausted and increasingly disillusioned with Hitler's leadership, is recalled to Germany in March 1943. The Afrika Korps fights on under new leadership, but the outcome is inevitable. Allied forces, now numbering in the hundreds of thousands, close in from all sides. By May 1943, the remaining Axis forces in Tunisia surrender. Over 275,000 German and Italian soldiers become prisoners of war, more than were captured at Stalingrad. North Africa is completely in Allied hands. But here's what often gets overlooked in this story. Who actually fought these campaigns? Yes, there were British, American, Australian, New Zealand, and German soldiers, but the majority of the forces involved were not from those countries. Over 1 million African soldiers served in World War II. In East Africa, troops from Kenya, Uganda, Tanganyika, Nyasaland, Northern Rhodesia, and South Africa formed the backbone of the forces that defeated Italian East Africa. The King's African Rifles, made up of soldiers from various East African territories, fought with extraordinary courage and effectiveness throughout the campaign. In North Africa, soldiers from across the British Empire played crucial roles. Indian divisions were some of the most experienced and capable units in the British Eighth Army. The 4th Indian Division fought in almost every major engagement from 1940 onwards. South African forces, including the 1st South African Division, participated in crucial battles throughout the campaign. Free French forces included substantial numbers of soldiers from French colonial territories in Africa. Senegalese, Algerian, Moroccan, and Tunisian troops who fought despite their complex relationship with colonialism. And then there were the logistics troops, the porters, the laborers who kept the war machine running. In East Africa, tens of thousands of African carriers moved supplies through terrain where vehicles couldn't go, often under fire, often dying from disease or exhaustion, rarely mentioned in official histories. Their contribution was absolutely essential to the Allied victory, but they remain largely invisible in popular memory. The African campaigns also had profound political implications that would reshape the continent. African soldiers who fought for the Allies in World War II returned home with new perspectives. They had fought for freedom and democracy against fascism, and many began asking why those principles didn't apply to them. The war experience radicalized many African veterans and contributed to the independence movements that would sweep across Africa in the 1950s and 1960s. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, and many other independence leaders were shaped by World War II experiences. The strategic importance of the African campaigns cannot be overstated. By defeating Italy in East Africa, the Allies secured their supply routes and eliminated an entire Axis theater of operations. By defeating the Germans in North Africa, they opened the path for the invasion of Sicily and Italy, knocking Italy out of the war and creating what Churchill called the soft underbelly of Europe. The resources, particularly oil from the Middle East and minerals from Southern Africa, that flowed to the Allied cause thanks to control of Africa, were absolutely crucial to eventual victory. Moreover, the African campaigns tied down hundreds of thousands of Axis troops, thousands of aircraft, and countless ships that could have been used elsewhere. Imagine if those forces had been available for the invasion of the Soviet Union or the defense of France. The Afrika Korps alone, at its peak, represented some of Germany's best troops and most effective commanders. Every tank destroyed in the desert was one less tank at Kursk or Normandy. Yet despite all this, the African fronts of World War II remain largely forgotten in popular culture and even in many history classes. When people think of World War II, they think of D-Day, Pearl Harbor, Stalingrad, the Battle of Britain, the battles of Africa, El Alamein, Keren, Gazala, Kasserine Pass are footnotes if they're mentioned at all. The African soldiers who fought are invisible. The strategic importance is downplayed. Why? Part of it is racism and Eurocentrism and how history has been written and taught. Part of it is that the decisive moments of the war happened elsewhere. Part of it is that the veterans of these campaigns, particularly African veterans, didn't have the platform to tell their stories. But whatever the reason, it's a profound injustice to the million-plus men who fought, bled, and died across African deserts, mountains, and jungles. So let me leave you with this. The next time someone talks about World War II as if it was only about Europe and the Pacific, remember the forgotten African fronts. Remember the King's African rifles marching through Ethiopian highlands. Remember the defenders of Tobruk holding out through months of siege. Remember the tank crews fighting in the blue at El Alamein. Remember the Indian divisions that fought in every major North African battle. Remember the South African pilots who flew countless missions. Remember the African porters who carried supplies through impossible terrain. The story of World War II in Africa is a story of extraordinary courage, brilliant strategy, brutal combat, and world-changing consequences. It's a story that involved millions of people from dozens of nations. It's a story that helped determine the outcome of the greatest conflict in human history. And it's a story that deserves to be remembered, told, and honored, just as much as any other chapter of that terrible, transformative war. The men who fought in Africa didn't fight for glory or headlines. They fought because they had to, because the world's freedom depended on it, and because they believed in something larger than themselves. That's worth remembering. That's worth telling. And that's why I've told you their story today.